Hi, welcome to Forum 1's August 2013 webinar, A Responsible Process to Responsive Design. I'm Brian Verhoeven from Forum 1 Communication, and I'll be monitoring today's webinar. To prevent background noise, all phone lines are currently muted. A few housekeeping items before we begin. First, we're pleased that so many people are interested in today's session. In order for us to have time for as many questions as possible, please submit those questions via the chat feature during the presentation. We'll have about 15 minutes for questions and answers at the end of the presentation, and we will respond to questions that have been submitted via the chat. We will also email you a link to the archived webinar within a few days. Today's presentation is led by myself, Corey Lafferty, and Malcolm Jones. Before we begin, I want to share a little bit about the amazing team at Forum 1. Our headquarters is in Alexandria, Virginia. We're about 72 people strong and have grown every year in our existence. We provide the full range of digital communication services for influential clients looking to change the world, and we're very proud of what we're doing. Since early 2011, our default approach has been to create responsive websites for our clients, such as advocacy groups like the Gorongosa National Park in Mozambique, data and applications like county health rankings, and content-heavy websites like the Center for Global Development. Prior to 2011, we have perfected our approach to deliver highly polished products. Our approach was at the time was centered on design specification and waterfall build problems. We describe this as the problem of cars versus transformers. We began to get really good at designing very polished websites that were shiny, and we could get the specification right down to the last detail. And we did this by creating design specifications and paper-based work that is focused on fixed width websites. But then, in 2011, everything changed, and we were no longer designing for fixed width or paper-based websites. We were designing transformers. And how do you do that on paper? Wireframes were no longer the tool of reference. So we had to change our process, and we had a few misses along the way. Today we're going to share our process for building responsive websites. The first thing that you need to know is that at the start of every build project, we have a structured process for ensuring that we understand what the organization is trying to accomplish, who they are trying to reach, and how the product we are building will help them achieve those goals. One of the first things that we do is to talk to audiences that we're trying to reach, what their goals are, their motivations, their needs, and how we can support them. And we document those in something we call personas. Then we often create low-fidelity sketches with the client stakeholders or end users to explore content and feature prioritization. We like to use mobile storyboards for this activity, and not to arrive at layouts, but to force prioritization of content. Because of the smaller screen size, we are asking our clients to only show us what is most important, not everything that they want on a single page. Another tool that we use quite often is page description diagrams to define what 3 pieces of content are most important within a particular view, and then the next 3, and then the rest. This allows us to prepare for the technical part of the project, where we are prioritizing what will show up first on a mobile screen, on a tablet screen, and finally, if a person comes to the website through the full desktop version, they'll be able to see more. But very early on in our process, we know what is most important on each page. Once discovery is done, we go into a traditional Agile Scrum sprints, which focuses on these core principles: individuals and interactions, working software, customer collaboration, and responding to change. The way that it works is that every 2 weeks we are deciding what to work on, prototyping an area we want to know more about, and supporting the current development and evaluating the prototype and the product. We're not saying that we don't sketch, but we do more prototyping than we do specification. The reason we do this is because we value learning and want to ensure we are building the best possible product we can with the funding available. Now I'm going to turn things over to Corey Lafferty, our Manager of Interface Engineering, who will talk more about our prototyping process.
Okay, was having trouble with the mute there, but got it now. Thanks, Brian. So I'm going to talk about prototyping. As Brian said, we were changing our process to be more agile, and as part of that, we were moving away from creating these giant stacks of wireframes in Visio or OmniGraffle. Once we started doing that, we needed something to replace them that was faster, easier to modify, and that communicated the information that the wireframes did not. We needed a new tool that could help us create fast, low-fidelity versions of concepts and ideas that could work well with responsive design. What we needed was a prototyping tool, and there were a lot of them out there. And here are just a few of them. Some of these tools focus on design, and they work very much like Photoshop. Others are more information architecture focused. Some of them are created with coders in mind and have a pretty high barrier of entry. Others have a complex user interface. Some of them are free, many of them are not. While we were evaluating the existing prototyping tools out there, we had a pretty specific list of things we needed. The tool we were looking for needed to be as fast or faster than creating normal wireframes, and it also needed to convey more information than the wireframes, particularly around responsive design. It would need to show how elements would respond on different screen sizes without us specifying that behavior. And what I mean by that is many of these tools would say allow you to place something on the page at desktop size, change over to the mobile size, and then you would have to manually reconfigure the element from desktop size and shrink it down and place it where you wanted. What we wanted was something that would show us how it would respond by default given the sites we build. It would need to allow us to duplicate and make small changes to pages and projects so that we could A/B test similar ideas against one another. And it would need to allow us to modify pages we created with it on the fly so we could get ideas in front of the clients and each other very quickly.
Just to clarify, one of the terms, wireframes, are just another term for design specification. So they represent the features and functionality that would appear on any page. We now use interactive prototypes to replace our wireframing process.
Okay. And perhaps most importantly, it needed to be easy enough to use so that every member of our team, front-end engineers, information architects, and even the project managers could jump into the tool and start working with it. None of the tools that we looked at fit exactly what we were looking for, so eventually we decided to just go out and make our own. The tool our user experience team ended up creating is called protease. It's a Firefox extension that runs in the browser, and it allows you to quickly create responsive HTML prototypes, and it's got a really cute little blue-green logo mascot guy that Mal designed. It's free, and it's in beta now, and if you're interested, you can grab a copy of it at prototype.com. So what is protease, and how have we incorporated it into our design process? Well, first of all, protease is based on the same approach to responsive design we use in development, which I'll talk about more in a minute. The basic idea, though, is that pages created in protease, by default, react to the different screen widths the same way as our Drupal theme does by default. Protease is created entirely with basic web technologies, meaning HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. There's nothing in it that isn't one of those things. Something you create in protease reacts in the browser just like a web page because it is a web page. Protease has almost entirely replaced our wireframing process, particularly for our larger responsive Drupal projects, which are the most common type of projects we work on. And lastly, well, not lastly, almost lastly, protease contains a library with all the design patterns we use over and over again on projects. This includes small, discrete page elements like the page title, the newsletter sign-up form, or the site breadcrumb. It also has larger patterns like a blog detail page or a contact us page. Of course, any element once it's added to the project can be modified and tweaked as much as you like. And lastly, and maybe most importantly, Proti can be used by people who know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and those that don't. The more familiar you are with those things, the further you'll be able to push your designs. But since Proti has a point-and-click interface and works entirely within the browser, almost anyone can quickly put a page together with it. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about breakpoints and how we use them when doing responsive design. The reason I chose this image for the slide is because we recently started using Sass, and one of the key Sass plugins is called Breakpoint. It's a great tool. It makes working with breakpoints so much easier, and it has a great page that lists the documentation very cleanly. However, the header of each section has a animated GIF of either Keanu Reeves or Patrick Swayze doing something a little silly, like saying whoa, or surfing, or looking kind of morose by a campfire. Now, anytime that I say breakpoint, or write breakpoint, or think breakpoint, I think about Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze, and I'm not sure that's a good thing. Amazing movie. Anyway, I said before that Proti is based on our typical approach to responsive design, but what is that? Well, when we were first getting into responsive design, we started by using the Omega-3 Drupal starter theme, which out of the box has default breakpoints set, which correspond roughly to the mobile, tablet, and desktop size of common devices. And here's what that looks like in code. You have 3 files, small, medium, and large, that are stacked together, kind of like a metaphor I usually use is a layer cake, with small being at the bottom. All devices, regardless of their size, get that file. Then if your device has a wide enough screen to get the medium file, that gets added after it. And the only thing that's in the medium file are the differences between small and medium. Small contains things like typography and the core elements of your site, everything you need for mobile. The only thing that goes into medium is what you need for the tablet size. And then finally, if your screen is wide enough, you get the large file, which adds on top of the medium file and just contains the differences between tablet and desktop size. This approach of saying here's your fluid layout for the mobile phones, and here's your tablet size, and here's your desktop layout, and they're ready to go, really helped our entire team grasp how responsive design worked and how we were going to use it. As we got more experience with responsive design, we moved beyond using the basic Omega-3 theme and created our own sub-theme to supplement it with a lot of customization. We did things like converted it to Sass, we added our own grid system, and we added other custom functionality like a script that collapses the main menu to a button at the mobile size. Currently, in fact, this month, we're in the process of moving beyond using a base theme altogether. Our team is working on creating a new theme from scratch, which relies heavily on Sass and the Sass add-ons Compass and Breakpoint. As you can see here in the Sass code, while the technical details have changed quite a bit, this core idea of having a mobile-first approach and then a set of default breakpoints to start with is still the same. The only difference now is in how it's coded and the added efficiency and flexibility that Sass gives us. So Proti uses this same mobile-first approach for prototyping, but what do we use prototyping for on projects? Well, first and foremost, we use it for quick wireframes and larger prototypes like this. This is not a screenshot. This is just a page from Proti that I've loaded into an iframe. This was actually one of the first designs we ever built with Proti for a homepage redesign. It has a little tab here. Off for a second. A little tab here that you can open, and you can very quickly see how the page would look at the different sizes. The same page realigned for tablet. And this is how it might look on a mobile phone. There's been some alterations here for mobile. Biggest one probably being that the main menu has collapsed now into a button up at the top that you can access. And you can get to the subpages. It also has some meta information here that you can add, whether the page title or other notes that you want to communicate about the purpose of the page. And it has page notes that you can turn on and off that you can add to any element if you wanted to say, add a note for the developer about how you were planning to implement it, or to the client, or the purpose of this section. And you click on these and you can put them and close them. We're not always prototyping entire sites or even entire pages. Often we will prototype just a single part of a page or a site. This is the early prototype for the main menu of the Gorongosa National Park site that we showed earlier. This shows the differences between the main menu between desktop, tablet, and mobile. We created this collaboratively before design or any real development work had been done for the main menu. Here you can see the final version of the site implemented at desktop size. And then here's the Proti version of the same menu. Here is the tablet version of the final site and its prototype version of the main menu. You can see that a lot of it has stayed the same. A few minor things have been tweaked, like the position of the logo and some of the text, but overall it's pretty similar to what we finally ended up implementing. And finally, here's the mobile-sized site and its early prototype. Prototyping the menu this way, we were able to bring up the discussion about how the site was going to work much earlier in the process than we normally would have, and we solved a major design issue before any code had been implemented and had to be reworked, which is a problem we had run into quite a few times before. Another thing we use prototyping for is technical tests and proof of concepts for certain interactions or design ideas. This one is a screenshot. This was from a PSD delivered for a home page. This is the sort of a feature area near the top of the page that shows 6 articles. And the idea here was that when you hovered over one of them, it would sort of grow out at the page at you, turn blue, and a longer text description would pop up, and then you could decide whether to click through and read the rest of the article. We debated quite a bit whether to implement this in something like Flash or a lot of jQuery. I thought it might be possible to do it in just CSS. So I created a 3-page concept. I have 2 test images, but this is another Proti page just dropped into an iframe. And using nothing but CSS, I was sort of able to create the core idea of this concept and then pass this page off to the developer who was actually working on the project, and he was able to take a lot of the CSS I had created straight out of Proti and drop it into the project, and then implement some of the finer details like the image change to having a blue background. Style guides. At this point, I'm going to hand things over to Mal, our interactive art director, because we're venturing into the land of designy, colory, typographically kind of stuff, and that's really more his domain.
That was an amazing introduction. Hi, I'm Mal. I use typographically color kind of things. What you're looking at is a style guide from Proti. One of the things we realized over time is that we can get some things decided quicker and also make folks on the team's lives easier if we start doing them in CSS and HTML. A key factor of any of our prototypes is that we didn't care if the code was reusable or not to a certain extent. When we used to make wireframes, like Brian was mentioning, no one ever kept our paper after a certain point in time. So we decided when prototyping to have that same principle. The core idea is to get big ideas down, challenges avoided early, but then we started thinking, where can we reuse code? And this is an example of that. What this is HTML and CSS that's inside of our prototyping tool that lets you define headers, body copy, links, buttons, all kinds of things. That way, we're getting that 80% of the site done before we have to focus on that big 20% of the site. Also, we can see as a designer how it works responsively, so I can make typographic adjustments as needed. It was a very, very good happenstance that came out of our prototyping. One of the things we also learned throughout this process and as we communicate with each other is the opportunity to learn. As we as our industry turns and becomes much more code-facing, and we all understand the power of that educationally, we can use small prototyping tools so other folks can learn CSS. Like Brian on the phone couldn't code with a hill of beans last year, and now he's making prototypes and editing the CSS and doing things like that through this process we've put together by talking and working with each other and using the prototyping tool that we decided to use. That's just kind of a bit of an added benefit. Because at the end of the day, the main thing we're relying on is validating our learning. We want to get any prototype that we've made in front of users for testing, for confirmation, for showing us where we went wrong. On the right, you'll see a little tiny screenshot of an early version of Prody. On the left, it's paper. To us, in our process, both of those count as prototypes. It makes for a much more streamlined process. And by already working with folks and working with our partners and saying that anything is a prototype, it opens up that world of iteration. You don't look at a thing anymore and say, this is the final version of what it is. You're ready to make it better and better throughout your process. And users and audiences are always key to that. But like anything we do at any point in time, here there be dragons. And honestly, still run into now. Our process, much like responsive design, is always evolving and changing and growing. So we try to find different ways to address the issues that we're going to bring up now in the most efficient and clean way possible. This is the biggest one. Responsive design cannot be an afterthought. It sounds like a silly thing to say, but it's not. Responsive design is not a feature of a website. It is not a link color. It is not a font size. Responsive design is how our audiences experience the website, be it on a mobile device, be it on a desktop, be it on a tablet, be it on a TV eventually, and probably right now actually. And our content and design needs to adapt to that. By thinking of that holistically throughout the entire process, you're going to get a better result at the end. This is a site we did for the Defense and Veterans Brain Injury Center. This is a project that was close to my heart. They service men and women that have serious brain injury, because it is the fastest growing injury among service members today. And as we were prioritizing what we call features, things like the carousel or the map in the top right or the audience-based navigation, responsive design became less important because we're like, oh, we're going to be doing it, but we really need to dig into the type of content or getting people ordering certain materials. So as we prioritized and designed the work and put the website up, we're like, okay, we're going to launch the site in a few weeks. Let's tighten up the responsive design of it. And this is what it looked like. Needless to say, that made for some fun days, going back and reverse engineering what we were doing because we considered it a feature, not a holistic process. Anytime responsive design comes up in any conversation, it needs to be from the beginning. Large images. The one slide we have without an image, and it's large images. Right now, the industry is still wrestling with this idea of, as trends go towards large emotional response with large images, full screen, really great photography, phones lots of times can't download that. Or even desktops if you're in a coffee shop with bad Wi-Fi. It's another holistic problem that needs to be addressed. It is getting there. As a matter of fact, in my inbox yesterday and today, there's some great experiments going on out there in the community working to solve this problem, be it serving a different image up depending on the device, or finding ways to compress images better, such as through tinypng.com and other services. But it's getting there. It's not quite there yet, but it's something to keep in mind. Many times what we'll do with a large photographic site, such as gorangosa.org that we mentioned earlier, is on phones, we are very selective about what images are getting loaded. Let's make that burden easier on the user. Let's make those burdens not even noticeable and still give them a highly engaging experience. Tables. Tables are how the web was built. For many, many years, 1995 onwards, we were doing wonderful things with tables. A tables made the whole data. Many of our clients and our partners do work with huge amounts of wonderful data that we want to expose to the world. The technology hasn't quite gotten there yet, so you need to be prepared for it soon. Identify those large data heavy areas. Make sure that we're talking about maybe another way to display it when it's on a phone. It could just be a simple list. Also, if a site is built in tables and you want it to become responsive, be prepared to have the conversation early that you're going to need to rebuild your website. It comes as a surprise sometimes in a conversation, but it is true. You'll get more return on your investment and more value out of the work that's being done by re-engineering things and by getting rid of those tables that create structure altogether. Embedded content. YouTube videos, they're everywhere. We also work a lot with, speaking of data, revealing data through a number of tools such as Tableau, which is a phenomenal data visualization service, but does not have a version for the phone. Scribed is a great way to embed documents, but again, you run into trouble when you're trying to make it truly responsive. What that means is, again, in those conversations, and you're going to hear us repeat this a lot today, in those conversations, be sure to address these content needs early. Start prototyping, start sitting down at the table and sketching and figuring out what the content is and how it can work. That way, you're just not suddenly walking into a page on your site and saying, oh, look, all over this, there's embedded PDFs. You're identifying that early and often. Site navigation is a fun one. It's a very fun one. You'll notice a little URL on the bottom of this slide. It's from Brad Frost. He has a series of responsive nav patterns on his website. It's a phenomenal resource. I cannot endorse this website enough. So you can see the various patterns that the community has put together to solve this riddle. We've written the four that tend to come up the most often in our work. The top nav or do nothing approach, that means you just let the navigation be the navigation. It tends to fall under itself quite often and look very badly, but it might work. The footer anchor, I like the name of that one. It brings all your navigation links to the bottom of your content. What this does, it means that a user comes and they are targeted on the content that they have searched for or come to on their device, and then when they're done that content, they're able to navigate the site. The third one is the hamburger menu. Delicious. This is actually our preferred method. You'll see it when we have the slide deck up for you all to have. That in the Gorangosa slide, you'll see it's 3 small lines up in the top right corner. It's called a hamburger because it's 2 pieces of bread with something in between. It's a click, and you see various links and various navigation within it. The last one is the hide and cry. This is what we tell no one. This is what we say to everyone when they want to hide information, is that you're going to make somebody cry. It's not fair for a user when you're making a responsive website to hide information. That is you're punishing them for coming to your content and to your site. And the conversation should be around how can we better serve those audiences, not what can we take away from them. Oh, there it goes. The last one is device fracturing is frustrating. It's nice to have Matisse in a presentation on responsive design. There's a lot of devices out there these days. Apple, Kindle, variations of Android operating systems on variations of devices, multiple sizes of iPads, multiple sizes of Galaxy tabs, multiple sizes of desktop monitors, both horizontal and vertical orientations. It is a very, very frustrating space to be in from a design standpoint. We need to be able to engineer solutions that address those devices. What we've worked up in our process is Apple becoming a baseline. Their devices, because there was a level of consistency in the devices that they're selling and offering, it let us test sooner without needing to focus on variations early in the process. Retina displays, which are the iPad 3 and the iPhone 5, they did change that a little bit now that images look different in both, but that goes back to the large images discussion. What's important is we're able to test for that baseline, and then we do work with our partners to determine how their audiences are viewing the content and where they would like them to view it. That way we get a strong group of devices to focus and test on, but we often do make recommendations that try not to focus on that Android version 1.0 that 0.0% of your site are coming to your content with. There's a lot of time and a lot of investment that goes into making these cross devices work. It's actually very similar to the days of anybody on the line remembers working a lot with Internet Explorer 6. It's a lot like that. So we do, again, just try to have that conversation early, often, make sure that we're meeting the needs of our partners and our audiences and making recommendations throughout of it. Meanwhile, while we're just sitting here testing quite often in our devices, we do here at Form 1, we do have a baseline secondary that goes beyond just the Apple devices. We do have Android testing, and for many of our partners, we've even worked with Nokia phones before on some of our international audiences, but it's all very partner and audience specific. So that was a lot in 35 minutes, but it can be summed up pretty easily. Direction setting, that planning we were talking about at the beginning, is so essential to a responsive design process. It gets everybody talking. It gets everybody understanding the goals that they're trying to meet. Communication, I already said it gets everybody talking. If teams aren't working together to create these solutions, you're going to run into the problem that we had with the Defense Veterans and Brain Injury Center, where something suddenly doesn't work and we need to figure it out. Cross-team communication and communication with audiences and partners solves that problem. It lets everyone validate the learning. It lets everyone understand. Through prototyping, same idea. We get those prototypes out there, be they paper, be they Proti, be they a prototyping device that you feel works best for you. DivShop, Webflow, there's many of them. Find the one that works best to get your ideas out there to create a shared understanding. You have that shared understanding, you're going to have a better product at the end of the day. Your audiences are going to enjoy it. It's going to be responsive. All right. And now for the fun part, the questions. They've been coming in. So here they come. We're going to be working together and tag teaming a bit to answer them. But on the screen right now, you do have a sea of Twitter handles. The first two are Form 1 and Prototype. Feel free to send any questions that way. And then the bottom three are Beaver Hoven, that's Brian. Skeleton Jones is myself, Malcolm Jones, and Corey Lafferty is Corey Lafferty. And we love getting questions about this kind of stuff. And that's just a very simple way to get in touch with us all. But now we will go to the questions that are coming in.
Thanks, guys. So Carl asks, do we reuse any of the code from the prototype in your production code? Now, you touched on this before, but would you like to elaborate a little bit?
Sorry, mute button problem. Yes, that was the bit I was mentioning earlier, where when we started working with prototypes in general, that was the first question everybody asked. Can we reuse the code? And we made a very conscious decision to say no, except when we can. The style elements page that we had up for a brief moment, that actually is reusable with our variation Drupal theme. It is one of the technologies we use so that folks like Corey can take that CSS and adapt it more quickly to the project at hand, as opposed to someone like myself creating a very complicated Photoshop file and then Corey's team having to take bits and pieces out of that to create that CSS document. But overall, no, Proti is not meant to be reusable code. I selfishly love my example of everyone threw away my beautiful wireframes and PSD printouts at the end of a project 2 years ago. Prototypes are the same principle. It's meant to just validate your learning and get your information out there.
Thank you. Craig actually asked if Prody can be used for the .NET platform? I guess I'll take that one. Look at it. So Prody can be used for the .NET platform in the way that any prototyping tool, whether it be OmniGraffle, DivShot, Blocks, any of the other prototyping tools out there, it's used to quickly sketch out ideas. It was not designed with .NET in mind. In fact, if anything, it was designed with Drupal and WordPress and some of the frameworks that we use internally in mind, and that's where the patterns came from. But it can be used for any platform, whether it's .NET, Expression Engine, or anything else. It's just standards compliant HTML, CSS, and we put in some jQuery. So yes, it can be, as long as Mal was alluding to, you're willing to throw away some of that code because it's about validating your understanding and learning and doing that usability test that we value throughout the process. We know we're making informed decisions. Dan asks, how do you choose between breakpoints?
That's actually a great question, and it builds off the .NET one a bit. With the modification that we've done to Prody and the concepts behind it, we actually have a twofold thought behind it. The breakpoints of the small, medium, large, we chose, there are 320 pixels, 740 pixels, I think it is, and then desktop is 960 pixels. For a while, this was the iPhone width, the iPad width, and then what was a quote-unquote standard desktop width. The reason we picked those three is because, frankly, they're the easiest to comprehend. Towards that idea of having folks understand responsive design and be able to do it even if they weren't coders or weren't fully engrossed in the terminology, we needed to create something that they understood. So by having those three breakpoints, we are able to draw it into a concrete item. And by thinking of those three sizes, we can address major concerns around how the content is going to work. The theoretical side of that, outside the technical side of it, is that the content should be determining your breakpoints. And eventually, we have plans that Prody may be able to have that type of flexibility. But for now, and for quick development, that's where they came from. It was the iPhone, the iPad, and desktop. And we just moved on from there and continue to help educate people on what responsive design is. You have any thoughts, Corey? Is that about right?
Yeah, I was going to jump in. Yeah, Prody just has those three breakpoints. They're based on the grid we created, which is a 1,000-pixel grid, and I think it's 720 at tablet size, and it corresponds roughly to the iOS devices. With the way we're doing things now, those are the ones we start with. That's here's your vanilla starting point, but you can always either modify those, add new ones, or tweak within those. I think there's a term out there now, instead of breakpoint, there's tweak points for the ones in between your major breakpoints, your little tiny fixes, and we do those quite often. Even on Gorangosa, the mobile size is not just the mobile size. There's 2 or 3 things, particularly around the mobile menu, that actually change as you get into the particularly small sizes.
So Roy asked, are there market share statistics that justify using Apple devices as the baseline?
No. Just to be completely transparent with that one, they're the most consistent devices. As Android fracturing happens and folks like Samsung or Google themselves build different layers on top of the Android operating system, they would perpetually introduce new variations on the code. Also, various phone browsers such as Dolphin, other items, all had these special sauce built inside of that. So much like when we prototype, we just need to give us that easy starting place. And then from there, we go to the Android devices that we do support by default. And that, I think it's an Android 2.2. Whenever you hear my voice go up like that, that means I'm looking at Corey and asking him.
The list keeps changing. I know there's a Kindle Fire in there. There's 4 or 5 specific. I mean, there's just too many Android devices to keep up with. But there's 4 or 5, and we change them up every couple months as new stuff comes out. But there's a list of things we test and fully support. And then there's all that other stuff out there that we kind of hope for the best because we don't have a million years to test everything.
And with Apple devices, that idea is that we have found in many of the traffic for many of our clients, the mobile traffic is primarily coming from Apple devices. Most often, actually, right now, it's often iPhone 4.
So Susan asked, would you have special tips for retrofitting an existing site to be responsive?
Maybe. It's not as easy as starting from scratch, and it really depends on the site. Whenever we get that request, and we actually do get it a lot, my response is always, let me see the site first, and then I'll tell you. If it's all laid out in tables and every header has a very specific background image, or worse, an image that actually has the text of the header inside it, and everything is designed for a very specific width, it's going to be very difficult to retrofit it. If it's not, and it's a pretty simple design, or uses CSS3 and doesn't have any of those things, it'd be easier to do it. And in those cases, we would just probably would not switch themes. You would keep the same theme, but you would go in and add in your own media queries to load new files or to add new styles for those specific things. But you, of course, in that case, you wouldn't be able to do a true mobile-first approach because you already have a site. So you would have to do sort of desktop and then go down from there.
It is one of the, and like Corey mentioned, we actually do get asked that quite often. And our response is, what's the site's goals? What do we need it to do? One of the things that's interesting with technology is that sites, thanks to the pinch and zoom, quote unquote, technology that exists on almost every multiple mobile devices these days, they are inherently a little bit responsive. You can expand the content, shrink in the content, those types of items. And what that does is, while it is important to be able to best serve your mobile customers and your mobile audiences, they understand that function. If they're on a smartphone, they can see that. So sometimes it is worth actually taking a step back and saying, okay, we have this existing site. Let's partner with somebody and talk to them about what it would take to get it done. Go pop open the hood, so to speak, and look at the HTML and look at how your site's built and how it's powered. It is one of those hard questions, but it is part of that discovery direction setting process that has to take. It can happen internally, but it's tough. It's very tough.
I would add, and this is part of the reason I may be a little gun shy about the retrofitting, is because the very first project we did not realize it until we got into it, but it was an Arabic and English site. So if you can imagine trying to do responsive where everything on the page suddenly flips going the other direction, that was a lot of fun.
Michael asked, what are our thoughts on doing mobile-first design, which I think is a good follow-up to this conversation of retrofitting and pinch and zoom and some other.
So mobile-first, we kind of do mobile everything.
Mobile at the same time?
Same time. We work in a model that ideally creates what we call the framework. And it's looking at navigation and that style elements page that I showed earlier, as well as overall themes of the site design. Mobile first is fantastic for priorities, for sketching and for those items. But sometimes working with some of the partners and the type of sites that we work on, to get the conversations happening easier, it actually helps designing at a desktop size. It helps people understand the visual language and helps people know what's going on. And then we quickly start working on navigation. We quickly start working on page layout, thinking responsively. So that's where kind of mobile first comes back into it. But ideally, the mobile conversation is part of the entire process. And in teams, for example, here, a team can work with a partner, with a product owner. That's who we call our main point of contact with our partners as part of the agile process, to determine, hey, what do you think would work best? Would you like to, do we need to show folks what it would look like on a phone first? Do you think we can get buy-in doing a homepage, or is it actually both at the same time to solve those big questions? mobile first kind of was strong and out there for a while. We've mutated it quite a bit, and even though we were laughing and joking that it's mobile everything, that really should be part of the process. It shouldn't be a mobile first, desktop second, everything else third type of thing, because then you're going to trick up on something when you get to the desktop side, which we've also run into.
This is Brian. I would just add that I think mobile first is a fantastic approach when you're dealing with a new product and you're trying to determine priority and what to build first and establishing the priorities for a page, like we showed the mood boards in the beginning of a project. On a redesign, we'll often use many of the principles from mobile first to understand priority. I think some of the challenges come with the mobile first approach when you're redesigning an existing website. You are dealing with a bunch of existing content and expectations from both users and internal stakeholders of what's going to appear on the site. So that's kind of why we've taken the mobile at the same time approach. We realize that nobody wants a website that has less functionality or content than what they currently have. They always want the same level, better, more. So we need to prioritize those things and do it at the same time to make sure we're designing for mobile. There is a question from Carl that says, will there be a version for the Chrome browser? I think that for now we're focused on the Firefox extension. We're constantly reevaluating what the next steps are for this tool. We did build it selfishly to support an internal need. It is open source. Folks can go get the Firefox extension and mend it for themselves if they want to. I'm not sure that we have plans to put it in Chrome specifically, but I can share that we are talking about what to do next with Proti.
Yeah, Proti's a big labor of love for us, and we created it to solve just a very specific need that we had. That's one of the earlier slides. Just kind of, I think there are a few out there for Chrome, and if it better fits your process, grab it, do it. Or if you have some great advice on turning Proti into a Chrome extension, you can let us know. We are working as we try to solve problems. We're playing a little bit with some newer frameworks that will actually remove it from an extension-based application altogether. But that's just conversation and beers after work type of things that we're trying to suss out on the back of a napkin right now.
Janet wants to know what typeface we're using in our slide deck.
Oh, that's Lead Gothic. Wait, no, is it? Yes, it's Lead Gothic. I should know our brand fonts better than that. Yeah, it's Lead Gothic. We occasionally use a Google one called Oswald as an alternate, but I think it's Lead Gothic.
And Craig asks, so Proti produces HTML, CSS, and jQuery to code that can be used on any platform. Again,
yeah, you can actually, so one of the things you can do inside of the extension is you can export out your files as flat HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So you can take your prototype, and show it on any computer, in any browser, any web-compliant browsers that we would suggest, i.e. 10, Firefox, and Chrome, and Safari. We mainly focus on Firefox and Chrome with our prototypes because we know that we can try out some different things without having to worry about cross-browser testing. But yes, you can save those flat files out and send them out to the world, and people can look at them in any browser. And Corey just scribbled to me that the font is Oswald that we are using in our presentation. I really like the font question. Thank you.
Well, guys, we're just about out of time. If you do have further questions for us, again, you can see our Twitter handles on the previous slide. And we want to thank you. There's the Twitter handle. Thanks, Corey. And then we also want to thank you and leave you with a few final resources. The first are the slides from this presentation. The second is a quick blog post that has an introduction to Prody on our website with a screencast in it that can get you started should you want a little direction. The second is that great website that Mel mentioned about navigation patterns from Brad Frost. Definitely recommend that resource. And then finally, there is a very old but fantastic article about page description diagrams that we use quite often when we're designing responsive. That was kind of that spreadsheet we showed in the middle of our presentation about these three things are high priority, these three things are medium priority, and here's the rest of the stuff that needs to be on the page. So thank you again. We're really excited that so many folks are interested in this topic. Please reach out to us on the social medias.
I just saw the link that went into the chat room. You actually have to have an ending slash after responsible slides for the first one. It's because of the JavaScript library that drives it. It loves that slash. Without it, you're going to see something strange.
Well, thank you very much for attending. We'll send an email out to all attendees with our slides in a few days. Have a good afternoon.